Hello, everyone. Today we'll talk about another very subjective kind of muktzeh, that of broken utensils and clothing that is worn out. So, just continuing the theme of yesterday of quoting from our Hasidic masters, there's a very well-known saying of Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotz, the Rebbe of Kotz, saying that there is nothing more um, whole than a whole with a W, than a broken heart, and that is because when we are broken or when we're feeling down, it pushes us to come closer to Hashem. We learned from Hannah that because she was so broken, that's when she dared to go ahead and pray in front of Eli, and so that is why I believe he said that. So, but broken utensils are something that we usually disregard. So here it goes. As we have seen, section 3, halacha 3, any item that is not suitable for Shabbat use is muktzeh mechamat gufo. We must now clarify at what point an item is considered unsuitable, unusable, and therefore muktzeh. As a rule, there are two factors that affect the status of such an object: its objective state and the owner's subjective attitude toward it. We will now explain. If one threw out perfectly good clothes or kelim before Shabbat, they do not become muktzeh, even though he is their owner. Since his personal attitude differs from that of most people, it is disregarded by halacha. So what's called Rov HaOlam, the majority of the world, doesn't treat clothing that is good like garbage. Nevertheless, if before Shabbat he threw out used clothing and kelim, they become muktzeh even if some people would use such items. Since the owner threw them out and they are used, they become muktzeh. But if he threw them out on Shabbat, they do not become muktzeh, since they were not muktzeh when Shabbat began, as they were still somewhat fit for use. They do not lose their status over the course of Shabbat. Um, if a kli breaks on Shabbat and the broken parts are still usable, the parts are not muktzeh. The broken pieces are only muktzeh if there's no possibility of using them. If you remember in Pashat Ekev, we learned that a kli stops being considered a kli if there's a hole big enough for a small pomegranate to go out of or in. So if the hole is that big, then of course you can't keep any liquids, but maybe some people would still use them for dry fruit or something like that. Nevertheless, if there is a danger that people may be hurt by the broken pieces, one may even use his hands to clear them away. If a kli broke before Shabbat and the owner threw away the broken pieces, then even if they could be used on Shabbat, they are muktzeh. So that's basically the balance between the objective and the subjective. If one part of a kli fell off, whether on Shabbat or before Shabbat, but it can be reattached, then even though it is not usable over Shabbat, it is not muktzeh. Just as one may move the kli, one may move the part that broke off, because it is still considered part of the kli. And there's a whole Mishnah chapter called Kol HaKelim, and it's basically Kol HaKelim Talim B'Daltotehem Mehem, that all of the utensils or tools can be moved on Shabbat, including their doors or covers. So let's say that you had a small cupboard or a chest, and the hinges fell loose or fell off. That is what we're talking about here. Uh, that we can move it and keep it aside. Therefore, if a beaded necklace broke, since one intends to restring the beads, they are not muktzeh, on condition that there is no concern that a knot will be tied on Shabbat to hold the necklace together. Similarly, false teeth or crowns that fall out are not muktzeh, since one intends to put them back. A button that falls off an item of clothing is not muktzeh either, since it will be replaced, even though a new button is muktzeh, since there is no use for it on Shabbat, because you're not going to sew a new button onto a clothing that already has all of its buttons. In this case, the button is not muktzeh, since it has already been part of the item of clothing and now it just fell off. Also, we were concerned that if somebody just swept it away, they would be very disturbed, because they won't be able to find the exact size and shape and color, etc. And so that's why we pick it up and put it somewhere safe, Of course, we're not supposed to play with it or anything like that because it is intended to go back on the clothing. In contrast, if an item was attached to the ground and then broke on Shabbat, it is muktzeh because nobody plans to move something attached to the ground. Therefore, if a door in a house falls off on Shabbat, one may not move it. Of course, if it's causing danger, you can't come into the house without moving it, then of course that is appropriate, but that's where we go back to Muktzeh mechamat gufo should be just moved letzorch mekomo, because we need its space. If disposable dishes have been used but could still be reused, they are not muktzeh. However, once they have been thrown into a filthy garbage can, they are muktzeh. Even if they have not been thrown away, they are muktzeh if they are so dirty that they would generally not be reused. However, if they are in a place where their filthiness disturbs people, they may be cleared away as they are considered a graf shelri, as we saw in the halacha yesterday. Just today, most disposable dishes, at least in North America, are paper, and so they really are disposable. You don't want the meat sauce that's on a plate to be used again for anything. But in a time when there was disposable dishes more fancy that are made out of hard plastic and just a good rinse could do that, then it really again goes back to the subjective decision of are we going to reuse them, meaning are we going to wash them or not? And based on that, we could determine if they are muktzeh or not. And last, if one dries his hands with paper towels and then put them into the paper recycling bin, they are still not muktzeh if people sometimes reuse them to wipe up spills. However, if the paper towels were deposited in a regular dirty garbage can, from which people generally would not retrieve them, they are muktzeh. And so, again, it gives us a view about valuing our things, but also recognizing that we are in a generation where we are a lot more disposable than like our things, sorry, are a lot more disposable than they used to be. And so again, it depends on the place and the time and the subjective use or non-use of these utensils. And we'll stop here and we'll open up for questions.